Workers, comrades, look around you and ask yourselves one question. How can a world built by your hands belong to those who have never lifted a single tool? How can the wealth created through your sweat be claimed as the natural inheritance of a class that contributes nothing but demands everything? This contradiction, this brutal absurdity, stands at the very center of our age. And until it is confronted, exposed and overthrown, humanity will remain chained to the illusions that keep you obedient to a system designed to consume your life while rewarding your oppressors. For centuries, the ruling class has cloaked its dominance behind the mask of progress, merit, and opportunity. But scratch the surface of these phrases, and beneath them you find only the same iron truth I laid bare long ago. Society is split into hostile camps, those who own and those who produce, those who command and those who obey, those who hoard and those who hunger. Nothing changes until this fundamental division is changed. Your struggle today is not a private burden, not a personal misfortune, not an isolated hardship. It is the living expression of the class war that pulses beneath every factory floor, every office desk, every street, every field, every nation. You are not suffering alone, you are suffering systematically. Your exploitation is not accidental, it is engineered. And the more you understand this, the more dangerous you become to the architects of inequality. They want you tired. They want you divided. They want you competing against one another for the scraps that fall from their banquet tables. Because the moment you grasp that your individual struggles are simply fragments of a larger historical process, the moment you understand that exploitation is not fate but design, you awaken as a force. The ruling class has always feared the organized worker conscious of their own power. The capitalist system thrives by transforming human beings into instruments of profit. Your time becomes a commodity. Your strength becomes a commodity. Even your dreams are shaped to fit the needs of the market. And in return you are given just enough to survive, never enough to challenge the order that keeps you subordinate. This machinery of exploitation was described in my earliest works, and it has only grown more refined, more global, more merciless with time. But understand this clearly. Every moment you resist, every injustice you expose, every demand you raise, these acts build the foundations of tomorrow. History does not move through the generosity of the powerful. It moves through the struggles of the oppressed who refuse to remain silent. The ruling class would have you believe that the system is eternal, that inequality is natural, that exploitation is unavoidable. But nowhere in the long record of human development has any ruling class ever stepped aside willingly. Every transformation in history, every advance in human freedom has been forged by the courage of ordinary people who discovered their collective strength. The same force lives in you. It lives in your refusal to accept unfair wages. It lives in your anger at being treated as replaceable. It lives in your recognition that society cannot function without your labor, your intelligence, your creativity. When you realize that the wealth of the world is the direct result of your work, you begin to see the future not as something predetermined, but as something built. And once you see this, you cannot unsee it. You must organize not as isolated individuals seeking personal escape, but as a unified class demanding structural liberation. Your unity is the weapon the ruling class cannot disarm. Your solidarity is the storm they cannot withstand. When workers understand that they share the same chains, they begin to forge the tools that will break them. Do not let anyone convince you that your struggle is small. Do not let anyone claim that your fight is futile. Do not let anyone tell you that you must wait patiently for change. Every step you take today, every protest, every strike, every collective decision pushes history forward. Even when victory appears distant, the very act of resisting capitalism's demands becomes a declaration that another world is possible. Comrades, the future is not given to you. It is not handed down by benevolent rulers or enlightened elites. The future is built by the brave, the determined, the aware by workers who refuse to be tools of another's profit. And so I say to you, rise with the knowledge that your struggle is the engine of progress. Organize with the certainty that your unity is stronger than every weapon of the ruling class. Fight with the conviction that the world you deserve will be born from the courage you show today. Because your struggle today is not merely for survival, it is the blueprint of the future. And the future belongs to those who dare to shape it. Your daily struggle exposes the core contradiction between labor and capital, because every hour you work, every task you perform, and every piece of value you create reveals the reality that society is organized around a relationship in which those who produce everything own nothing, while those who produce nothing own everything. This contradiction is not hidden in complicated theories or distant economic laws. It is woven into the very rhythm of your life. You wake up early. You give your strength, your concentration, your creativity to a system that measures your worth only through the profit you generate for those above you, and at the end of the day you are left with wages that barely sustain you. Every moment you experience this imbalance, every time you feel the weight of exhaustion while others accumulate wealth from your effort, you are living the contradiction that defines the capitalist structure. You are told that wages reflect fairness, that the market rewards you for your contribution, but the truth becomes clear the moment you observe how much more value you produce than you ever receive. The surplus you create, the excess beyond what is required for your survival, is not yours to claim. It is taken, absorbed, and accumulated by capital, forming the foundation of profit. This extraction is not a glitch in the system, it is the system itself. And the harder you work, the more efficiently you perform, the more this contradiction intensifies, because it expands the wealth of those who own the means of production, while deepening your dependence on them for wages that never match the value of your labor. In every workplace, the hierarchy stands as a physical manifestation of this contradiction. The tools, the machines, the buildings, the technology, all the instruments necessary for production are not controlled by the people who use them daily. Instead, they are monopolized by those who profit from your work without ever participating in it. You are left without agency over the conditions of your labor, without control over the product of your labor, and without ownership of the wealth generated by your labor. This alienation is not accidental. It is the structural requirement of capital accumulation. To keep the system functioning, you must remain dependent, and to keep profits flowing, you must remain separated from the very value you create. Your struggle becomes a daily reminder that your life is organized around serving interests that are not your own. As prices rise and wages stagnate, as productivity increases while your income remains unchanged, as corporations grow richer while workers battle insecurity, the contradiction becomes unavoidable. You see it when executives celebrate record profits while you worry about rent. You see it when technological advancements designed to ease labor are instead used to intensify your workload or replace your position entirely. You see it when economic crises, created by the chaos of capital itself, result in your job loss, while the ruling class is bailed out by the wealth your labor produced. Even beyond the workplace, the contradiction follows you. It shapes your housing, your healthcare, your education, and your opportunities. Your struggle to survive under capitalism is not limited to your job. It extends into every sphere of your life. The pressures you feel, the anxiety, the instability, the constant need to work harder just to stay afloat are symptoms of a system that demands more from you than it ever intends to give back. You confront this contradiction every time you question why society has the resources to enrich a few but never enough to secure a dignified life for all. You confront it every time you see communities deteriorate while corporate fortunes expand. You confront it whenever you notice that wealth circulates upward while hardship sinks downward. This contradiction sharpens with each new cycle of exploitation. Capital depends on your labor but denies you the fruits of it. It needs you to produce value but ensures you never accumulate enough to challenge its control. The very existence of this dynamic generates conflict, resistance, and a growing awareness that the struggle you face is not personal failure but systemic design. Your daily experiences become a form of education, revealing the truth that no amount of individual effort can overcome the structural inequality inherent in a system built on extracting value from those who produce it. By living this contradiction, by feeling its pressure and witnessing its injustices, you become aware of the antagonism that defines your relationship to capital. And awareness is the beginning of transformation. Exploitation is systemic, not accidental, and must be confronted collectively because it is embedded in the very architecture of capitalist society, shaping its institutions, its laws, its values, and the daily interactions between those who own and those who labor. It is not the outcome of a few greedy individuals or isolated acts of injustice. It is the predictable result of a system built to extract value from one class for the benefit of another. When you experience low wages, long hours, insecurity, or the pressure to sacrifice your well-being just to maintain employment, these are not personal misfortunes but symptoms of a structure that requires your exploitation in order to function. Capital does not grow without taking from you, and it cannot survive unless you are kept in a position where your labor enriches others more than it sustains yourself. This exploitation is reproduced every day through the mechanisms that appear normal, even natural. You enter the workplace and sign away your time, discipline your body to the demands of the market, and perform tasks that generate far more value than you are compensated for. Yet this imbalance is accepted as routine. Your wage disguises the deeper truth that you are only paid enough to continue working, not enough to claim the wealth you create. The system ensures that the surplus you generate flows upward to those who own the means of production. This transfer is celebrated as efficiency, productivity, or economic growth. But for you, it manifests as exhaustion, limited opportunities, and a never-ending struggle to keep up with the rising cost of living. The pattern repeats itself every day, every year, every generation, reaffirming that exploitation is not an accident, but the foundation upon which the ruling class builds its power. The systemic nature of exploitation is visible in the way society prioritizes profit over people. When the economy slows, it is workers who lose jobs, not capitalists who lose fortunes. When companies expand, it is owners who accumulate wealth, not workers who receive proportional rewards. Every technological breakthrough that could reduce labor is instead used to intensify control, monitor productivity, and cut costs at the expense of workers' livelihoods. Even institutions that claim neutrality, schools, courts, governments are structured to protect the interests of those who benefit from exploitation. You are taught to accept this imbalance, to see it as the only possible way society can function. You are encouraged to compete with your fellow workers rather than question why the fruits of collective labor are privately owned. This ideological conditioning reinforces the system, making it seem permanent even as it continues to harm the majority. Your individual struggle against exploitation is real, but on its own it cannot dismantle the forces that keep you subordinated. The system is too vast, too entrenched, too deeply woven into every aspect of life for isolated resistance to shift its foundations. When you confront your employer alone, the power imbalance is overwhelming. The corporation has resources, legal protections, and the backing of the entire economic order. You have only your labor, and as long as you remain isolated, you can be replaced, ignored, or silenced. The structure of exploitation is designed to keep you divided, encouraging you to believe that your problems are personal rather than collective, and that your survival depends on competing with other workers instead of uniting with them. This fragmentation weakens your capacity to challenge the system, ensuring that exploitation continues unchecked. Collective confrontation breaks this cycle. When workers recognize that their experiences are shared, that their hardships stem from the same root, they begin to see themselves not as isolated individuals, but as a class bound by common struggles and common interests. This awareness transforms despair into solidarity, fear into determination, and silence into collective voice. Through organization, workers can negotiate from a position of strength, resisting the pressures that capitalism imposes on them. They can challenge the structures that extract their labor while denying them dignity. Collective action exposes the system's vulnerability, revealing that its power relies entirely on the labor of those it exploits. When workers withdraw that labor or wield it strategically, the machinery of exploitation falters. Exploitation persists because it is systemic, but systems can be transformed when the people subjected to them unite in conscious resistance. When workers act together, they not only defend themselves against daily injustices, but also begin to reshape the social order that sustains those injustices. The recognition that exploitation is not accidental becomes the spark that ignites collective struggle, and through that struggle, the possibility of building a society free from domination begins to emerge. Workers possess the real power because they produce all wealth. For nothing in society, no commodity, no service, no technological marvel, no towering institution comes into existence without the application of human labor. Every object you touch, every building you enter, every device you rely on was shaped, assembled, or maintained by the hands, minds, and energies of working people. Material wealth does not emerge from the pockets of capitalists or the abstractions of financial markets. It is born from the daily efforts of millions whose contributions are rarely acknowledged yet absolutely indispensable. When you trace the origins of any product back to its creation, you inevitably find the worker, not the owner, at its foundation. This simple truth reveals that the working class, though exploited, is the true engine of society, the force without which nothing can function. This central fact is obscured by the capitalist order that portrays wealth as the outcome of entrepreneurship, investment, or managerial brilliance. But investment alone cannot generate value. The machines owned by capitalists do not operate themselves. The raw materials purchased by corporations do not transform into commodities spontaneously. Even the most advanced technologies require human labor to design, operate, supervise, repair, and implement. The capitalist contributes capital, but that capital represents dead labor, past work accumulated and appropriated, whereas the worker contributes living labor, the only element capable of creating new value. It is this living labor that expands wealth, fuels industry, and sustains the entire economic system. Yet the system masks this dependence to maintain the illusion of capitalist supremacy. The ruling class understands, even if they never admit it, that their power rests entirely on the continued labor of those beneath them. If workers cease to work, production halts, profits collapse, and the entire structure of capitalism trembles. History has shown repeatedly that when workers strike or disrupt production, the supposedly invincible power of capital quickly reveals its fragility. Without workers, the machines become silent metal, the supply chains grind to a halt, the markets panic, and the comforts enjoyed by the elite evaporate. This vulnerability exposes a fundamental contradiction. The class that holds power controls nothing essential, while the class that lacks power sustains everything essential. The authority of the capitalist is therefore artificial, maintained not by intrinsic strength, but by the conditioning, division, and economic coercion imposed upon the worker. Yet despite this reality, workers often underestimate their collective strength. The system is engineered to keep them isolated, competing, and preoccupied with survival. They are told that they are replaceable, that their labor is unskilled or easily automated, that their worth is minimal. These narratives serve a purpose: to obscure the fact that the ruling class depends entirely on the very people it seeks to belittle. Even in industries where automation has advanced, the technology itself is a product of human labor and remains dependent on human oversight, innovation, and maintenance. Every step of production, from conception to completion, relies on the working class. Their power lies not in individual roles, but in their collective indispensability, a truth capitalists fear above all else. When workers recognize that they are the producers of all wealth, their view of society begins to shift. They start to question why those who create everything own nothing, while those who create nothing own everything. This awareness is transformative because it reveals that the social order is not natural or inevitable, but constructed to benefit a minority at the expense of the majority. When workers internalize the idea that they are the foundation of the economy, they begin to see themselves as historical agents capable of reshaping society rather than passive subjects trapped within it. This consciousness changes the nature of their struggle. It becomes not just a fight for better conditions, but a fight for control over the very system their labor sustains. The power of workers is magnified when they act together. Individually, a worker can be threatened, replaced, or dismissed. But collectively, workers form an unstoppable force. The capitalist class is small, isolated, and dependent. The working class is vast, interconnected, and essential. Unity transforms scattered grievances into a coherent challenge to the dominance of capital. Through collective action, workers can disrupt the flow of profits, negotiate from a position of strength, and confront the authority that exploits them. Their power does not come from wealth or ownership, but from their ability to make society function or to withhold that function. Understanding that workers produce all wealth is not merely an economic observation, it is a recognition of their latent power. When workers become conscious of their role as creators of value, they no longer see themselves as subordinate, but as the rightful architects of the future. This realization undermines the legitimacy of capitalist rule and opens the path toward a society organized around the needs and aspirations of those who labor rather than those who profit from labor. The moment workers grasp that they are the true foundation of all wealth, they begin to understand that they also hold the capacity to transform the world they sustain. Unity and organization are the ruling class's greatest fear because nothing threatens the foundations of capitalist power more than workers recognizing their shared interests, joining together and acting as a conscious, collective force. The ruling class maintains its dominance not through inherent strength, but through the fragmentation of those it exploits. It depends on workers seeing themselves as isolated individuals rather than members of a single class, bound by common struggles and common enemies. As long as you remain divided by trade, by skill, by nationality, by race, by workplace, by competition, the ruling class can rule effortlessly. But the moment workers begin to unite, the apparent power of the elites begins to dissolve, revealing itself as shallow, artificial, and reliant entirely on the cooperation of those it oppresses. That is why unity, more than any weapon or ideology, strikes fear into the hearts of the powerful. Every structure of capitalist society is designed to prevent unity. Workplaces are organized hierarchically to pit workers against each other, with promotions, wages, and recognition distributed as rewards for individualism rather than cooperation. Entire industries are built on precarious employment, ensuring workers cannot trust that their colleagues will remain long enough to build solidarity. Governments cultivate divisions among the working class through propaganda, legal constraints, and narratives that emphasize differences rather than shared conditions. Even education teaches competition as a virtue, conditioning each person to see others as rivals rather than comrades. These mechanisms are not accidental. They are weapons designed to ensure workers never realize the magnitude of their collective power. The ruling class understands that an organized workforce can cripple production, disrupt profits, and challenge the economic order itself. A strike is not merely the withdrawal of labor, it is the revelation of where real power lies. When workers refuse to move, the world stops moving with them. The supply chains collapse, the machines fall silent, the profits evaporate, and the illusion of capitalist invincibility is shattered. The ruling class fears this because they know they cannot produce value themselves. Their wealth, their status, their influence, all of it flows from the labor of millions who receive only a fraction of what they generate. Unity turns this dependency into a weapon, transforming the working class from a subdued population into a force capable of reshaping society. Organization magnifies this power even further. Unity without structure can be momentary, emotional, or easily dispersed, but organization turns unity into a permanent, disciplined force. When workers build unions, councils, committees, and movements, they create institutions capable of enduring beyond individual struggles. Organization allows them to strategize, negotiate collectively, and defend themselves against retaliation. It gives them the capacity to escalate from small demands to systemic challenges, from workplace disputes to political transformation. With organization, the working class can articulate its interests, coordinate its actions, and exert influence across all sectors of society. The ruling class fears this not just because it threatens profits, but because it threatens their entire claim to legitimacy. Historically, every moment of profound challenge to capitalist power has been rooted in organized workers acting together. Governments tremble not when individuals protest, but when masses of workers, unified and conscious, refuse to cooperate with the system that exploits them. The ruling class responds to such moments with repression, propaganda, and divide and rule tactics, precisely because they recognize the danger. Concessions are offered not out of generosity, but out of fear. Fear that workers might move from demanding reforms to demanding control. Fear that the exploited might no longer consent to their exploitation. Fear that the institutions built to protect the elite might crumble under the pressure of collective will. Unity is powerful because it dissolves the illusions that keep workers obedient. When you stand alone, the system feels overwhelming. When you stand with others, the system looks suddenly small. Organization is powerful because it transforms scattered anger into coordinated strength. Together they reveal a truth the ruling class wishes to hide: that workers, when united and organized, hold more power than any employer, any corporation, or any government. The ruling class fears unity because it exposes their dependency. They fear organization because it challenges their control. They fear collective action because it opens the possibility of a world no longer built on exploitation. When workers realize they share the same chains, they also discover they share the same capacity to break them. Unity gives them confidence. Organization gives them direction. And together these forces create the potential for transformation. The ruling class fears this because it signals the beginning of their end, the unraveling of a system that survives only through division, silence, and isolation. Unity and organization are not merely strategies, they are the awakening of a class that has long been taught to doubt its own power. Once awakened, it becomes a force capable of reshaping society at its roots, and that possibility is what the ruling class fears most. Every act of resistance today builds the foundation for tomorrow's liberation, because each moment a worker refuses to accept exploitation, each time someone challenges the injustices of the system, they chip away at the ideological, economic, and political structures that uphold the power of the ruling class. Resistance is not merely an emotional reaction to oppression, it is a historical force that accumulates, grows, and transforms the consciousness of the oppressed. Even small acts that seem insignificant in isolation become part of a broader process that changes how people understand themselves, their role in society, and the possibilities of the future. Every refusal to bow to injustice becomes a spark that ignites awareness, strengthens solidarity, and weakens the illusion that the current system is unchangeable. Resistance plants seeds that may not bloom immediately, but they take root in the minds of workers, shaping the collective determination needed for liberation. Under capitalism, the ruling class relies on the belief that the masses are powerless, that their exploitation is permanent, and that resistance is futile. This belief is maintained through ideology, fear, and the daily pressures of survival. But every act of defiance, no matter how small, cracks this illusion. When a worker challenges unfair treatment, others witness it. When individuals speak out against exploitation, they create space for others to find their voices. When communities stand against injustice, they demonstrate that oppression is not a natural order, but a structure that can be confronted. These acts accumulate into a collective memory that strengthens the conviction that oppression is neither eternal nor undefeatable. Each act becomes a testament to the fact that resistance is not only possible but necessary. Resistance also exposes the contradictions within the system. Capitalism depends on the passive cooperation of workers, yet every strike, protest, or refusal disrupts the flow of profit. The ruling class fears resistance because it reveals that the system is fragile, not invincible. When workers halt production, it becomes clear that the economy moves only through their labor. When communities unite against injustice, it reveals that power does not lie solely in institutions, but in collective will. By resisting, workers demonstrate that the structures of authority can be challenged and even dismantled. This understanding becomes a powerful catalyst for further action, as people begin to see themselves not as subjects but as agents capable of shaping history. Every act of resistance also builds bonds of solidarity. The isolated individual who suffers silently remains vulnerable, but the moment they resist, they reach out beyond their isolation. Others join them, support them, and recognize their own struggles reflected in that act. Solidarity grows through shared experiences of resistance, which create networks of trust, common purpose, and collective identity. These bonds are the building blocks of movements, and movements are the engines of liberation. The ruling class strives to keep workers fragmented because they know that unity forged in resistance is a threat to the very foundations of their power. With each act of defiance, workers learn that they are not alone, that their struggles are interconnected, and that together they possess the strength to confront the forces that oppress them. Resistance also transforms consciousness. Workers begin to question the narratives that justify exploitation. They start to understand that their hardships are not personal failures, but systemic impositions. Through resistance, they develop the confidence to demand more than survival. They begin to envision the possibility of freedom, dignity, and control over their own lives. Consciousness does not shift overnight, but each act of resistance pushes it forward. It shapes political awareness, deepens class identity, and nurtures the desire for structural change. Liberation cannot be achieved without this transformation of thought, and acts of resistance are the very moments that spark it. Finally, resistance accumulates into historical momentum. Revolutions do not erupt spontaneously, they emerge from countless acts of defiance, each adding pressure until the system can no longer contain it. Every protest, every organizing effort, every refusal to submit builds toward a tipping point where the oppressed recognize their collective power and the ruling class loses its grip. What seems small today becomes the memory, inspiration, and foundation for tomorrow's struggle. Liberation is not born from a single heroic act, but from the millions of moments in which ordinary people decide they will no longer accept injustice. Each act of resistance becomes a brick in the structure of a new society, a society built not on domination but on collective freedom. In the end, everything returns to a single truth. The world you live in is built by your hands, sustained by your labor, and shaped by your daily struggle, yet claimed by those who neither sweat nor sacrifice. The contradictions you confront are not personal burdens, but the living evidence of a system that cannot survive without exploiting you, dividing you, and convincing you that you are powerless. But the moment you recognize that your struggle is not isolated, that exploitation is systemic, that your labor produces all wealth, that unity is your greatest weapon, and that every act of resistance today pushes history forward, you step into your rightful place as the force capable of transforming society. The ruling class fears your awakening because it knows that the future belongs not to those who hoard power, but to those who create it. And when workers rise together, aware, organized, and unafraid, they do more than challenge the system. They begin to build the foundation of a world in which freedom, dignity, and justice are not ideals but lived realities.